If Roy had not come upstairs to check on me that Sunday morning instead of waiting for me to bring his biscuits down, I would have unlocked my storage unit alone, and Marcus Webb would have made sure I never had the chance to tell anyone what I found. My name is Dorothy Callahan. I am 63 years old, and this is my true story from Nashville, Tennessee. My husband James died on a Thursday in February, which I have always thought was particularly unkind of fate. Thursdays are unremarkable days. They do not carry the weight that a Monday does, or the mercy of a Friday. He was 67, and he had been slowing down for 2 years before his heart simply decided it had done enough. We had been married for 41 years. He had worked as a field investigator for a regional insurance company for most of that time, a quiet, methodical man who believed that dishonesty always left a trail if you looked carefully enough. I had spent 28 years as a school librarian in Memphis, and when we retired, we planned to move closer to our daughter in Nashville and fill our days with grandchildren and bad television and the kind of peaceful boredom that sounds dull until the alternative arrives. James died before we finished unpacking. Our daughter wanted me to move in with her. I understood the offer for what it was, love wrapped in worry. But I had spent 4 decades being a wife and a mother, and I was not ready to become a dependent. I signed a 1-year lease at the Merritt Place Apartments on the east side of Nashville, a mid-rise brick building that was older than it looked and quieter than the price suggested. The unit was small, 2 bedrooms, one of which I used for James's boxes, the kind of boxes you cannot bring yourself to open but also cannot bring yourself to throw away. I took a part-time position at the Inglewood Branch Library 3 mornings a week. It was not the same as my old job. The children were different. The system was different. And I was different. But books still smelled the same, and that was enough to get me through the door each morning. The grief that follows a long marriage is not dramatic. People expect widows to weep loudly and wear black and refuse to eat. What no one prepares you for is the particular silence of a kitchen where only one person needs coffee. The way a television feels like company until you realize you have been watching the same program for an hour without absorbing a single word. The way you reach across the bed at 3 a.m., and the absence on the other side is so complete it feels physical, like something pressed against your chest. I met Roy in my 3rd week at Merritt Place. He was replacing a broken seal on the laundry room door, crouched on the floor with a utility knife and the unhurried patience of a man who had learned long ago that rushing things made them worse. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, broad-shouldered, with hands that showed the kind of work he had done his whole life. He stood when I came in, nodded the way people do when they are not sure if you want conversation or not. I did not want conversation, but I thanked him anyway, and he said, "The following Sunday morning I made biscuits. I had always made them on Sundays. James had eaten them every week for 4 decades, with butter and a thin spread of sourwood, honey, and the first Sunday after he died, I made them out of habit and then stood in my kitchen looking at a full pan with nowhere to put them. My daughter lived 40 minutes away. The neighbors on my floor were strangers. I put a few on a plate and rode the elevator down to the maintenance office near the parking garage. Roy was there, going over work orders with a cup of coffee that looked like it had been sitting too long. I set the plate on his desk and told him I had made too many. He looked at the biscuits, then at me, with the careful expression of someone deciding whether to ask a question or leave it alone. He said, "Thank you," and I went back upstairs. The next Sunday I brought them again. And the Sunday after that, it became the kind of routine that does not get decided so much as it accumulates. I would knock on the maintenance office door at 9:30, leave a plate wrapped in foil, and walk back to the elevator. Sometimes Roy was there, sometimes he was not. But the plate was always empty by Monday morning, and he always acknowledged it the next time he saw me. Usually just a nod or a quiet, "Those were good." "Miss Dorothy," he had learned my name from the building directory. I had learned his from his shirt. Over time, I noticed things about Roy the way you notice things about a person you see regularly, without ever sitting down with them. He arrived before 7 every morning. He stayed until problems were solved, not until 5 o'clock. He knew which tenants needed extra time to answer their door, and which ones preferred he leave a note instead of knocking. He knew when the parking garage light on the second level had started flickering again and fixed it before anyone thought to report it. He noticed things. That was the quality that struck me most. In a world full of people who moved through space looking at their phones, Roy looked at the actual world around him. He had a daughter, he mentioned once, briefly, in the way people mention something before they have decided how much they want to say. She was in college in Knoxville. He did not say more, and I did not ask. I understood that some things were offered in pieces, or not at all. November arrived and the mornings turned sharp and gray. I began bringing 2 cups of coffee down with the biscuits, one for him and one that I would drink at the small table in the corner of his office while he checked the day's maintenance log. We rarely talked much, but sitting in a room with another person doing ordinary things is its own kind of companionship, one I had not realized I was missing until I found it. It was during one of those mornings that Roy mentioned, without looking up from his clipboard, that a man had come around twice asking about the storage units in the basement. Asked which ones belonged to newer tenants, he said. Said he was doing a survey for the management company. Roy's pen moved across the page. Management company doesn't do surveys like that. Not without paperwork from the front office. I stirred my coffee. What did he look like? Roy described him. Medium height, maybe 40, 45. Dark jacket. The kind of confidence that came from believing no one would question him. Roy had told him the building manager handled all tenant inquiries and watched him walk back to his car. A newer model sedan parked in the visitor space with the engine already running, like he had not planned to stay long. I told Roy I was sure it was nothing. He nodded slowly and went back to his clipboard. But he wrote something down, and I understood that he was not as sure as I was. James had kept files. Not at the insurance office. Those had all been returned or archived when he retired. But James was the kind of man who did not separate his professional habits from his personal ones. When he believed something warranted follow-up, he followed up. When he thought a case had been closed prematurely, he kept his own notes. 3 boxes in my storage unit, in the basement of Merritt Place, held folders, printed reports, handwritten memos, and a small external hard drive that I had never plugged in because I had not known the password and had not cared enough to find it. I had moved those boxes because I had moved everything. I had not opened them because grief makes you want to leave certain things sealed. I did not connect any of this to the man Roy described. Not yet. December settled over the building, and I decorated my door with a small wreath and pretended the season felt like something. My daughter came for 2 weekends and we cooked together and watched the grandchildren take apart everything we had just put in order. Those weekends were the fullest my apartment ever felt, and the quietest it ever felt was the Monday after she drove back home. On the second Tuesday of December, I went down to the storage units to find a box of Christmas ornaments. The basement corridor was lit by 2 overhead fixtures, one of which had never worked right, casting long shadows toward the far wall. I found my unit, typed in the combination, and pulled the door open. Everything was where I had left it, stacked and labeled in the careful way James would have approved of. Except the 3 boxes of his files, they were still there. But they were not stacked the way I had stacked them. The top box was slightly forward, as though it had been lifted and set back down in a hurry. The flap was not folded the way I folded flaps, tucked on the left side first. James had laughed at me for years about that particular habit. I stood in the doorway of that storage unit for a long moment, holding a box of Christmas ornaments that suddenly felt very light, and told myself I was remembering wrong. But I was a librarian for 28 years. I did not remember wrong. I brought the ornaments upstairs and said nothing. I told myself the same things people always tell themselves when the explanation that makes sense is the one they do not want to believe. The lock was fine. Nothing was missing. The building had a key system, a camera at the main entrance, residents who had lived here for years. There was nothing in those boxes that anyone would want. I believed that for 6 more days. The following Monday, I rode down to do laundry and found Roy in the corridor near the storage units, not working, just standing with the same expression I recognized from the morning he had mentioned the stranger asking about surveys. When he saw me, he straightened. "I need to show you something," he said. He led me to the monitor in the maintenance office, a small screen connected to the basement camera system. He pulled up footage from the previous Thursday, 2:14 a.m. The image was dim but sufficient. A figure in a dark jacket moved along the storage corridor with a flashlight and what looked like a lock bypass tool, the kind sold online that no one legitimate needed. He spent 4 minutes at a unit 3 doors down from mine. Then he tried mine. The camera angle did not show whether he succeeded. "That unit 3 doors down," Roy said quietly, "belongs to a woman who moved out last month. It's empty." But he didn't know that. My hands were cold. He was looking for something specific. Roy nodded. He came back Saturday night. Same time, same tool. This time, he went straight to yours. I sat down in the chair beside his desk. The room felt very still. Roy pulled up another image, a still captured from the parking garage camera, clearer than the basement footage. The man from the survey visit, the same jacket, the same sedan with the engine already running. "I ran the plate," Roy said. "I know a guy at a body shop who owes me a favor. Vehicle is registered to a property management consulting firm. Name on the registration is Marcus Webb. The name did not mean anything to me, but the way Roy said it made me understand that it had meant something to him once he found it. "You looked him up?" I said. I looked him up. He set a printed page on the desk. Marcus Webb, licensed contractor, property management and insurance claims adjuster. Several reviews on business sites, some positive, several that had been removed. One complaint filed with the Tennessee Department of Commerce that had been closed without resolution. One civil lawsuit settled out of court. Sealed. Roy tapped the page. "I don't know what he wants," he said. "But he's been in this building twice in the dark, and your storage unit is what he's looking for." I looked at the printed page and felt something shift in my chest, the way things shift when you realize the ground you have been standing on is not as solid as you thought. Because I did know what Marcus Webb might want, even if I had not known his name until that moment. I thought about 3 boxes of James's files. I thought about the hard drive I had never plugged in. And I thought about something my daughter had said in passing at Thanksgiving, something I had filed away and not returned to. She had said that a man had called our old Memphis number looking for James, that he had said he was from the insurance company following up on an old case, that she had told him James had passed, that she had thought it odd because James had been retired for 3 years. "Roy," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "I need to tell you something about my husband's work." James had been meticulous and quiet and easily underestimated, which made him very good at catching people who believed their schemes were subtle enough to survive scrutiny. In the last 18 months before his retirement, he had been assigned to review a cluster of commercial property damage claims that had been flagged internally for inconsistencies, small amounts inflated by modest percentages. Payouts approved without full inspections. Contractors who submitted bids that matched repair costs down to the dollar, which no contractor ever does unless the numbers have been coordinated in advance. The scheme was not spectacular. It was careful and patient and designed to look like bureaucratic slippage. James had named 3 people in his final report. 2 had been small players. 1 had not. 1 had been the person coordinating the entire arrangement. A mid-level claims consultant who had built relationships with multiple property management firms across Tennessee and Kentucky, collecting a percentage of each inflated claim in cash payments routed through a shell company. His name had not appeared on the final submitted report because the case had been handed to a different department when James retired and had been, as he put it, the one time he mentioned it to me, let go somewhere between the third floor and the fourth. He had kept his notes anyway. He always kept his notes. I had not remembered the name Marcus Webb because James had never said it out loud, not to me, not in our home. He was careful about that. He did not bring the weight of that work into our kitchen or our Sunday mornings. But the name was in those boxes, and so was everything else. Roy listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and let out a slow breath. So he knows about the files, he said. He knows James filed something. He may not know exactly what's in there, but he's not willing to leave it alone. No, I said. He is not. Roy stood and walked to the door of his office, looked down the corridor for a moment, then came back. You haven't opened those boxes, not since James died, which means you don't know what's in them. Which means he doesn't know what you know. That realization settled between us quietly. I was not a threat because I had evidence. I was a perceived threat because I was the widow of the man who had gathered it, living in a building where the evidence sat in sealed boxes in a basement storage unit, and Marcus Webb had apparently spent months convincing himself that I was sitting on something that could bury him. Roy made a decision with the same unhurried certainty I had watched him bring to every broken fixture and failing seal in that building. We're not going downstairs tonight, he said. And you're not going anywhere near that storage unit without me. I nodded. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel invisible. We went to the police the next morning. Roy drove. He brought his phone, which held the stills from the security footage, the license plate he had looked up, and several additional images he had captured on his own phone in the preceding days. Marcus Webb's sedan parked on the street, 2 buildings over with the engine running. Webb himself, standing at the corner of the parking garage entrance at 11:40 p.m. on a Sunday, pretending to scroll through his phone. Roy had printed dates and times on an index card in his steady block handwriting. The officer who took our initial statement was young and careful. He brought in a detective when Roy played the basement footage. The detective's name was Nguyen, a compact and observant woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, who asked precise questions and wrote down the answers in a way that made it clear she was going to use every word. When I explained James's background, she stopped writing. Your husband worked insurance fraud investigation, she repeated slowly, and the files from his last active case are in your storage unit. I believe so. She took off her reading glasses entirely. Mrs. Callahan, has anyone contacted you since your husband passed about a case he was working on? I told her about the call to my daughter. What followed moved faster than I expected. Detective Nguyen made 2 phone calls in the hallway while Roy and I waited with coffee that tasted like the coffee in Roy's office, sufficient but not good. When she came back, her expression had shifted in a way I recognized from years of watching people absorb information they had not expected. Marcus Webb has an active file, she said. State Insurance Commission, separate complaint, filed 8 months ago by a property owner in Clarksville. It stalled because they couldn't connect him to the cash transfers. Your husband's notes may be exactly what connects those dots. She leaned forward. We'd like to go through those files with you. 2 hours later, in the presence of Detective Wynne and a woman from the Insurance Commission named Patricia, who wore a blazer and carried a laptop, I opened James's boxes for the first time since I had packed them. Roy stayed in the hallway because he said it felt like a private moment, which was exactly the right thing to understand without being told. The files were James at his most thorough, indexed, cross-referenced, annotated in his careful handwriting with the particular shorthand he had developed over 30 years. Claim numbers, payout dates, contractor names, shell company designations, cash flow estimates. Marcus Webb appeared on page 6 of the primary report folder under the heading Coordinating Party Probable. James had not submitted it as conclusive. He had submitted it as a strong enough pattern to warrant continuation. The continuation had not happened, but the documentation had. Patricia, from the Insurance Commission, went very quiet as she read. Then she looked at Detective Nguyen. The hard drive required a specialist from the department's digital forensics team. It took 72 hours to access. What it contained, James had labeled simply as supplemental. It was supplemental in the way that a second foundation is supplemental to a house. Financial records, scanned receipts, time-stamped email threads forwarded from an anonymous account to James's personal address by someone on the inside of the scheme who had apparently wanted it stopped but had not been brave enough to go through official channels. 3 years of coordinated fraud across 46 properties in 4 Tennessee counties, total diversion estimated at just under $2 million. Marcus Webb was arrested on a Wednesday evening. Roy texted me one word: done. I sat in my small apartment with the lights on and the television off and felt something I had not expected to feel, which was proud. Not of myself. Of James. Of his careful, patient insistence on keeping notes no one had asked him to keep, in boxes no one had opened, in a storage unit in a building where he had never lived. He had done what he always did. He had left a trail. Webb's attorney tried several approaches at trial. He suggested the files were outdated, the emails unverifiable, the testimony of a grieving widow unreliable. The Insurance Commission's forensic accountant testified for 4 hours. Patricia testified. Roy testified about what he had seen and recorded with the economy of a man who had spent a lifetime noticing things other people looked past. He described the dates, the times, the license plate, the behavior. He did not editorialize. He did not have to. I testified on the 4th day. I told the jury about James and about the boxes and about not knowing what was in them for months, because grief has a way of making you afraid of the things your loved ones left behind. I told them what it felt like to understand that someone had decided I was a liability simply because I existed and my husband had done his job correctly. My voice did not shake as much as I expected it to. James had spent 41 years being steady in rooms that required it, and I had apparently absorbed more of that than I realized. The defense attorney asked whether I had always known what was in the files. I said no. He asked whether I had sought out Marcus Webb or initiated any investigation. He asked what I had done when Roy first showed me the security footage. I said I had gone to the police, because that is what you do. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts, including the charge of criminal trespass that applied to the basement visits and a stalking statute that covered the surveillance of my home address. The sentencing included restitution obligations to the property owners whose claims had been fraudulently inflated over 3 years. Detective Nguyen called me when it was over. She said James would have been satisfied. I thought he would have been more than that. I thought he would have called it settled. Life after a trial returns to ordinary things gradually, the way color comes back to a room when someone opens the curtains slowly rather than all at once. I went back to the library on my 3 mornings. The children still came in with their loud shoes and their urgent questions and their complete lack of interest in returning books on time, and I found that I was glad for all of it. The world they inhabited was large and still forming, and full of problems they had not yet imagined. There is something clarifying about spending time with people who have not yet learned to be afraid. Roy and I kept our Sunday morning routine. The biscuits, the coffee, the comfortable silence of 2 people who had moved past the stage of needing to explain themselves to each other. His daughter came home for spring break, and he brought her by the library one afternoon to say hello. A tall young woman with her father's careful eyes and her own particular confidence. She shook my hand firmly and told me she had heard a lot about my biscuits. I told her the recipe was straightforward, and I would write it down any time she wanted. Roy looked like a man who did not know what to do with gratitude and had settled on pretending to examine a bookshelf. He had a brother in Chattanooga he had not spoken to in several years, a disagreement that had calcified over time in the way disagreements do when no one initiates the conversation that would dissolve them. I did not push. But I mentioned once, in passing, the way I had learned to mention things to Roy, that sometimes the cost of continuing a silence becomes higher than the cost of speaking first. He nodded the way he always nodded when he was storing something rather than responding to it. 2 months later, he mentioned, also in passing, that he and his brother had talked, that they had talked for a long time, that they had plans to drive down to Chattanooga in June. He did not elaborate and I did not ask, but when he handed me back the empty plate that Sunday, he held it for a moment before releasing it, which was as close as Roy got to saying thank you for something large. My daughter came for Easter, and we opened 2 more of James's boxes together. Not the work files, those had gone to the investigators. The other boxes, his books, his notes on history and engineering, and the particular crossword puzzle collections he had ordered from a catalog every Christmas. His voice was in every margin. I found a photograph I had not seen in 20 years, the 2 of us at a state park in the fall, young enough that I barely recognized myself, and old enough that I recognized everything about the way he was looking at me. I put it on the mantel. It seemed right that he should be able to see the room. I am Sheshtisiont Terry now, still at Merritt Place, still at the library, still making biscuits on Sunday mornings. The storage unit in the basement holds Christmas ornaments and summer linens and a wooden rocking chair that needs a new arm, which Roy has offered twice to fix, and which I have declined twice because I am not ready to use it in an empty room yet, though I expect I will be eventually. What I have learned from all of this is something I suspect James knew long before I did, which is that evil is rarely theatrical. It does not arrive with warnings or loud intentions. It moves quietly through familiar spaces, wearing the right credentials, asking reasonable-sounding questions, counting on the assumption that people who are grieving and tired and alone will not look too closely at the things that feel slightly wrong. It counts on silence. It counts on the idea that people in buildings pass each other without really seeing each other, that a maintenance man is furniture, that a widow bringing biscuits is simply someone with too much time and an old recipe. What Marcus Webb did not count on was Roy. What Roy did not count on was me. And what neither of us could have planned was the way 2 people who had every reason to simply get through their days without involvement chose, over a series of small, ordinary mornings, to see each other instead. I did not give Roy biscuits because I expected anything in return. I gave them because the silence in my kitchen on Sunday mornings was very heavy, and baking was one of the few things that made my hands feel purposeful again, and because he was a person working in a building full of people who looked past him, and I had been a librarian long enough to understand what it costs a person to be consistently looked past. He noticed things because he was the kind of man who had always noticed things. He wrote things down because instinct told him to. He came upstairs to find me on a Sunday morning instead of waiting, because something felt wrong in the way that things feel wrong before you can name exactly why. And because of that, I am here to say all of this. The world asks us to move quickly and look down and mind our own business and treat strangers as furniture and assume that the discomfort we feel is overreaction. The world is wrong about all of those things. Kindness is not a luxury. Attention is not nosiness. Noticing the person in the room with you is not a small act. It is possibly the most important thing you do on any given day, and you will almost never know it when you do it. James left a trail. Roy paid attention. I made biscuits on Sunday mornings because my hands needed somewhere to be, and somehow, between those 3 ordinary things, the right outcome happened. Where are you watching from? And what is one small thing someone has done for you that turned out to matter more than either of you knew? Tell me in the comments. I would truly love to hear.